She was about to lose her children. He was lost in his own empire when a billionaire CEO decides to work undercover in his warehouse. He finds a widow crying between the shelves, and what she tells him about an act of kindness that changed her life makes his world collapse. Because that gesture was his 12 years ago, and now fate is collecting its price. This is the story of how a single moment of compassion can echo through an entire lifetime, and how love is born in the most unlikely places. Prepare to feel.
The clock read 4:43 in the morning when Nadia Steele crossed through the warehouse gate, her footsteps echoing on the cold concrete like a reminder of how many times she'd done this before. Harrisburg's cutting wind pulled tears from her eyes before she even had a reason to cry. But reasons, those were never in short supply. She pulled her badge from her pocket with the same hand that hours earlier had combed through the twins' hair while they slept, trembling fingers caressing the little faces that were the only reason she still got up. Harrisburg didn't forgive the weak, and Nadia couldn't afford to be weak. Inside the warehouse, fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects, illuminating endless corridors of metal shelves holding merchandise for people she'd never know. Nadia adjusted her gloves, took a deep breath, and began. 1 item, 2, 3. Precision was her armor, every movement calculated, every box in its right place, every second counted as if her life depended on it. Because it did. The judge had been clear. Financial stability, proven routine, demonstrable emotional health. Any slip and Matthew and Grace Steele would rip away what little reason she had left to exist.
But the truth, the one she hid even from herself, was that Nadia was crumbling inside. Every morning was a silent war against the urge to simply stop, to surrender to an exhaustion that was no longer just physical, but of the soul. She hadn't slept right in months. She dreamed of Lucas every night, woke reaching for the empty side of the bed, and the shock of absence hit her as if it were the first time. Again, again, again. How could someone miss someone this much and still have to keep living? The hours dragged on as they always did, but today there was something different in the air. An almost imperceptible tension, like when the sky darkens before a storm. Nadia couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was the fact that the night before Grace had called again, her steady voice carrying that mix of concern and accusation. "Are you okay, Nadia? Are the kids okay? Because you know if you need help." Help? The word sounded like a threat, as if help were the first step toward replacement.
When her shift reached the halfway point, Nadia allowed herself 30 seconds of rest. She leaned against the stack of boxes, closed her eyes, and brought her hand to her pocket, where she kept a wrinkled photo of the twins, Ethan and Emma. Wide smiles, eyes that didn't yet know the word loss. She ran her thumb along the corner of the photo, that automatic gesture that pulled her back when the world became too dark. They needed her whole. But what if she was no longer whole? What if Matthew and Grace were right? Sarah appeared at her side with 2 cups of watered-down coffee, her worried gaze saying everything words didn't need to say. "You holding up okay?" she asked quietly. Nadia nodded, because that's what she did, held up. She'd always held up, since she was 15 when she took on her little brother, then when she built a life alongside Lucas, and now alone, carrying the weight of 2 worlds on her shoulders. Sarah didn't push, but before leaving she lightly touched her friend's shoulder, a small gesture, simple, that almost broke Nadia right there. But she didn't break. She went back to work, precise movements hiding the tremor in her hands. Because if there was one thing Nadia Steele knew how to do, it was keep going, even when every fiber of her being begged her to stop. The problem is that no one can keep going forever. And on that freezing Harrisburg morning, something inside her began to crack, silently, inevitably, like thin ice beneath the feet of someone who hasn't yet realized they're about to fall.
The shift meeting began with Ruby Graves standing before the whiteboard, arms crossed and wearing that expression everyone knew, the one that meant she was about to announce something nobody would like. "Changes," she said, and the word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Nadia felt her stomach tighten. Changes were never good. Not for someone who depended on every penny, every predictable minute, every gear working exactly as it should. Ruby continued, explaining adjustments to schedules, redistribution of zones, new inventory protocols. None of it made sense. They were sudden alterations without prior warning, as if someone had messed with the pieces of an already completed puzzle. Sarah nudged Nadia lightly, whispering, "This is weird, isn't it?" And it was. Ruby was methodical, predictable. She wasn't the type of supervisor who changed working systems without clear reason. But there she was, flipping through papers with a stiffness that seemed uncomfortable even for her. When someone questioned why the changes were being made, Ruby simply answered they were orders from regional administration. No one else asked. No one ever asked, because questions could cost jobs, and jobs cost lives. Nadia lowered her eyes and pressed her fingers against her palm, trying to push away the growing feeling that the ground beneath her feet was starting to shake.
What Nadia didn't know, what no one there knew, was that these changes weren't random. They were surgical, millimetric adjustments made by someone who understood systems, flows, how small alterations could save lives without anyone noticing. But for her, in that moment, it was just one more thing out of her control, one more unpredictable variable in an equation already at its limit. She needed stability, routine, something solid to hold on to. And now even that was being stripped away from her, piece by piece. When the meeting ended, Nadia returned to her zone with heavier steps than usual. The shelves seemed to multiply, the corridors to stretch infinitely. She began sorting orders, but for the first time in months, she made a mistake, grabbed the wrong item, put it in the wrong box, and only noticed after it was already sealed. Her heart raced. One mistake, just one. But one mistake was all it took for Ruby to make a note, for administration to question, for Matthew and Grace to use as proof that she was falling apart. Nadia took a deep breath, broke the seal, corrected the error, but her hands were trembling now, and she couldn't make them stop.
That's when Ruby appeared beside her, bringing a clipboard and a man Nadia had never seen before. Tall, broad shoulders, simple operator uniform, but something about him stood out. Maybe the posture, maybe the way he observed everything around him with attention that was too silent. "Nadia, this is Spencer Walsh," Ruby announced in a tone that tried to be casual but sounded rehearsed. "He'll be working with us for a while. Can you show him how the zones work?" Nadia nodded mechanically because refusing wasn't an option. Spencer extended his hand. She shook it. His hand was firm, calloused, but his eyes had something she couldn't decipher. Spencer didn't say much while she explained the procedures. He just listened, asked pointed questions, carried boxes with an efficiency that seemed natural but also studied. Nadia didn't like the feeling of being observed, even though he wasn't looking directly at her. It was as if he could see beyond the boxes, beyond the mechanical movements, beyond the mask she wore every day. And that bothered her, because Nadia couldn't afford to be seen. Being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerable meant being in danger. At the end of the shift, as she gathered her things, Nadia noticed Spencer was still there, adjusting something on the time control panel. He glanced at her, nodded slightly, then went back to what he was doing. Nothing much, just a common gesture. But something about that moment stuck in Nadia's mind as she drove to pick up the twins from daycare. A strange feeling, almost like a shiver, as if the universe had just changed frequencies and she was the only one who hadn't noticed yet. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. It was just administrative changes, just another new operator. Nothing that would change her life. Nothing at all.
Inventory night fell over the warehouse like a sentence. The lights seemed colder, the corridors emptier, and the silence between the noise of forklifts carried a weight Nadia felt in her shoulders. She'd managed to switch shifts to stay later. Overtime meant extra money, and extra money meant one more chance to prove to the judge that she could, yes, support her children alone. But as she sorted boxes in aisle G, far from everyone, something inside her began to crumble. It wasn't sudden. It was like a dam cracking slowly, the accumulated weight of months finally finding the right crack to explode. She stopped in the middle of the aisle, her legs weakening, and leaned against a cold shelf. The photo of the twins was in her pocket, as always, but this time, when she pulled out the wrinkled paper, tears came before she could stop them. Ethan and Emma smiled in the image, innocent, oblivious to the fact that their mother was about to lose everything. "I can't," Nadia whispered into the void, her voice cracking. "I can't anymore." And for the first time in 8 months, she allowed the words to come out, the words she hid even from herself, that she suffocated every morning when she got up, that she buried beneath the mask of strength and discipline. I can't take it. I'm going to fail."
Tears ran hot down her frozen face, and Nadia let herself slide to the floor, back against the shelf, hugging her knees as if she could protect herself from her own pain. There, hidden among boxes of products no one would ever see, she cried. She cried for Lucas, for the man who loved her and left without warning, leaving a hole so big that all the air in the world couldn't fill it. She cried for her children, who asked when Daddy was coming back, and she no longer knew what to answer. She cried for herself, for the woman she was before and who she no longer recognized in the mirror. And she cried because she was tired, so tired that even breathing hurt. That's when she heard footsteps, slow, hesitant. Nadia looked up abruptly, wiping her face with the back of her hand, her heart racing. Spencer Walsh was there, standing a few yards away, hands in his pockets, face serious but not invasive. He didn't say anything, didn't ask, "Are you okay?" because it was obvious she wasn't. Didn't say, "Can I help?" because some pain has no help. He just stood there, in silence, as if his presence alone was enough to say, "You're not alone right now." And somehow, that was worse than any question, because it made Nadia crumble even more.
"Sorry," she managed to say, voice choked, even without knowing why she was apologizing. Spencer took a step forward, slowly, and sat on the floor, back against the opposite shelf, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't need to apologize," he said, voice low, steady, but gentle in a way she didn't expect. "Sometimes we just need to stop." Nadia looked at him through blurred tears, and something in that moment, in the way he didn't try to fix, didn't try to minimize, just existed beside her pain, made the words start to come out, slowly, stumbling, but coming out. She told him about the twins, about the custody battle, about Matthew and Grace, who said they loved her, but were willing to rip away from her the only thing still keeping her alive. She told him about the debts, about the sleepless nights, about the constant fear that a single mistake would be enough to lose everything. And then, almost unintentionally, she told him about the one good memory she still carried like a talisman against the darkness. "When Lucas and I were teenagers," she said, voice trembling, "we had nothing, literally nothing. My baby brother had just been born, and I was trying to raise him alone. We were in a supermarket parking lot, counting change, trying to buy diapers. And a man showed up. We didn't even really see his face. He just paid for everything and left $200 extra. Said, "Pay it forward when you can." Nadia wiped her face, smiling through the tears. Lucas never forgot. That changed him, changed us. And now he's gone, and I'm here, failing to pay it forward, failing at everything.
Spencer didn't move, but something changed in him, something imperceptible but profound, as if the ground had opened beneath his feet and he was falling in slow motion. He pressed his fingers against his own hands, took a deep breath, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out different, lower, heavier. "You're not failing," he said, and there was something in the words that seemed too true to be just kindness. "You're here. You're standing. That's already more than most could manage." Nadia looked at him, and for the first time in months, she felt something beyond fear. She felt hope, or maybe just the distant memory of what it was like to be seen, really seen, not judged, not measured, just seen. They stayed there for a few more minutes in silence while the warehouse continued spinning around them. When Nadia finally stood up, legs still shaky, Spencer stood with her. "Thank you," she said, and he just nodded. But as she walked away down the aisle, he remained standing, looking at the place where she had been, the weight of truth crushing his chest like a press. 12 years, Christmas Eve, a supermarket, 2 scared teenagers. He remembered. God, how he remembered. And now, looking at the widow of the boy he'd helped that distant night, Spencer Walsh felt the entire world shift on its axis. Because some gestures, he realized, never die. They just wait for the right moment to return and collect their price. The weeks that followed were strange in a way Nadia couldn't name. Small things began to change. Things so subtle that, isolated, seemed like coincidences. Her shift was adjusted to hours that fit perfectly with daycare. A system error increased her salary by $300, and when she questioned Ruby, the supervisor simply said it was a retroactive correction for unpaid overtime. Nadia accepted it because she needed to accept it, but something about it bothered her, as if invisible hands were reorganizing her life without asking permission. And at the center of it all, always there, was Spencer Walsh, working in silence, adjusting things, tinkering with panels, never drawing attention, but always present. He never mentioned inventory night, never asked about the twins, about the case, about anything. But he was there. When Nadia carried boxes that were too heavy, he appeared and shared the weight without saying a word. When she forgot lunch, which happened frequently, she'd find an extra sandwich in the break room, always in the same simple wrapper, no note, no explanation. And when Ruby needed someone to cover difficult shifts, somehow it was never Nadia. It was as if someone had built an invisible dome around her, protective, silent, and completely inexplicable.
Sarah was the first to notice. "That Spencer is weird," she commented one day as they sorted orders side by side. "He doesn't talk much, doesn't socialize, but he's always watching, especially you." Nadia felt her face heat up. "Don't be ridiculous," she responded, but her voice came out too defensive. Sarah raised her eyebrows, that look of someone who knows exactly what they're seeing. "Look, I'm not saying it's bad. Maybe it's even good. But be careful, Nadia. You can't afford to trust too quickly." The words kept echoing in Nadia's head for the rest of the day. Because Sarah was right. She couldn't trust. Not again. Not after losing everything. But then came the call. Adam Lowell, attorney, specialized in custody cases. He'd heard about her situation through an anonymous referral, and was willing to take the case pro bono. Nadia held the phone with both hands, heart beating so hard she could barely hear her own words. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why would you do this?" Adam hesitated only a second before responding. "Because someone believes you deserve a fair chance, and I agree." When she hung up, Nadia leaned against the warehouse bathroom wall and cried again, but this time they were different tears. They were tears of someone who had just seen light at the end of a tunnel that had seemed infinite.
The legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Adam was meticulous, relentless, and presented evidence of financial stability, structured routine, emotional support, things Nadia didn't even know she had until he showed them. Matthew and Grace fought, of course. They brought witnesses, argued about the best interest of the children, used the pain of their own grief as a weapon. But Adam dismantled each argument with surgical precision. And when the judge finally struck his gavel, declaring that custody would remain with Nadia Steele, she felt the entire world reorganize around her. Ethan and Emma were hers, still hers, and no one could take that away. But victory brought something unexpected with it. Questions. How had Adam found such detailed evidence? Who was the anonymous referral? Why had the warehouse adjustments started exactly when she needed them most? Nadia began investigating, discreetly, asking here and there, piecing things together. And the more she searched, the more Spencer Walsh appeared between the lines. He had access to the systems. He'd arrived exactly when the changes began. He was always there, always helping, always watching. And then, one night, while searching through documents Adam had left behind, she saw it. A signature, an authorization, a name that made her blood run cold. Spencer Walsh. Not operator, CEO, founder, the man who controlled every bolt, every system, every life inside that empire of steel and concrete.
The floor disappeared. Nadia sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the paper, trying to process what this meant. He had lied. From the beginning. Everything had been a charade. And worse, much worse, he wasn't just the CEO. He was the man from the parking lot. The man from Christmas Eve. The man who had changed her and Lucas's life 12 years ago. And now he was there, again, pulling the strings of her life as if she were a puppet. The pain Nadia felt in that moment was worse than anything. Worse than Lucas's death. Worse than the custody battle. Because it was betrayal. It was manipulation. It was proof that in the end, she'd never had control over anything. And that she didn't know if she could forgive. Nadia didn't sleep that night. She sat on the bed, the crumpled paper between her fingers, mind spinning in circles that led nowhere. Every memory was now contaminated. Every kind gesture from Spencer, every coincidental adjustment, every silent look she'd interpreted as empathy. It was all a lie. Or worse, it was all pity. She wasn't a woman fighting for survival. She was a charity project, an experiment. The widow of the boy he'd helped once, now transformed into an object of personal redemption. Rage burned in Nadia's chest like acid, but beneath the rage was something even more painful. Shame. Because she had believed, had started to trust, had even, God, how stupid she'd been, started to feel something for him. She waited until the next shift, not because she needed time to think about what to say, but because she needed witnesses. She needed him to know she was no longer the broken woman he'd found crying between shelves. When Spencer arrived, in that simple uniform and that discreet manner of someone who belonged there, Nadia was waiting. Sarah noticed first. The rigid posture, the clenched fists,
the look that could cut steel. "Nadia, what are you going to do?" she whispered, worried. But Nadia didn't answer. She just walked straight to Spencer, who was adjusting a forklift, and when he looked up and smiled, that smile she thought was genuine, she felt the last barrier crumble.
"Spencer Walsh," she said, and the name came out like an accusation. He froze, the smile disappeared, and Nadia saw the exact moment he understood that she knew. CEO of Walsh Logistics, billionaire, founder of an empire built on the backs of people like me. Her voice was steady now, fueled by fury. And the man from the parking lot, the one who paid for the diapers, the one who changed my husband's life, the one I spent 12 years imagining as an angel. She took a step forward, and Spencer backed away, hands raised as if he could contain the hurricane about to crash over him. "You lied to me, played with me, used me as some kind of moral experiment to clean your dirty conscience." Around them, the warehouse had fallen silent. Ruby stood a few yards away, clipboard forgotten in her hands. Sarah held her breath. Other operators had stopped working, watching the scene as if witnessing an accident in slow motion. Spencer took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice came out low, carrying a weight Nadia hadn't expected. "You're right. I lied. About who I am, about why I was here, but never about what I felt seeing you fighting. Never about the respect I have for you." Nadia laughed, a bitter sound, without humor. "Respect? You treated me like a project, like a cause, like someone who needed to be saved by the great Spencer Walsh."
"No," he responded, and there was something breaking in his voice now. "I came here because my company was failing, because the people who sustain all of this were giving up, and I didn't understand why. I came looking for answers, and I found you." He took a step forward, eyes fixed on hers. "And you taught me that I'd forgotten what matters, that I'd built an empire but lost my humanity in the process. That boy in the parking lot, Lucas, he said he'd pay it forward one day. And he did. He lived, trying to be better, trying to help, trying to matter. And me? I hid behind numbers and profits and convinced myself I was making a difference." His voice failed. "When I found you crying, when you told that story, I realized I had failed. With him, with you, with everyone." But Nadia didn't want to hear it, didn't want his words to make sense, because if they did, the rage keeping her standing would disappear, and she didn't know what would be left. "You had no right," she said, voice cracking, "no right to decide for me, to meddle in my life, to make me believe I'd done it alone, when really it was just you pulling the strings." Spencer closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears there, and Nadia hated that it affected her. "You're right," he said, "and I'm going to fix it." He turned to Ruby, to the operators watching. "I resign as CEO, effective today."
The shock reverberated through the warehouse like a wave. Ruby stepped forward, mouth open. "Spencer, you can't—" But he raised his hand, interrupting. "I can, and I will. I'm going to appoint a board led by people who really know what it means to work here, people like you. And I'm going to spend the next year working in every distribution center in the company, not as CEO, as an operator. For real." He looked at Nadia again, and there was something devastating in that look. "You and Lucas taught me to pay it forward, but I forgot. Now I'm going to do it right, not for you, for me. Because I need to learn to be the man that boy believed I was." Nadia felt something break inside her. something she didn't know if it was rage or pain or a mixture of both. She wanted to scream, wanted to hit him, wanted him to disappear forever. But she also wanted him to stay. And that contradiction was so unbearable that all she could do was turn her back and leave. She walked through the warehouse, seeing nothing, crossed the frozen parking lot, got in her car and drove without destination. And when she finally stopped, she was at the cemetery where Lucas was buried. She sat on the cold grass, placed her hand on a headstone, and whispered, "He came back. The man from the parking lot. And I don't know if I forgive him for lying or if I hate him for making me feel again." The wind blew, carrying the words away, and Nadia stayed there, alone, trying to understand how the world could crumble and rebuild itself at the same time.
6 months, 183 days since Nadia had last seen Spencer Walsh, since he'd left that Harrisburg warehouse carrying only a backpack and the promise that he would learn, truly, what it meant to work with his hands. She'd followed through the news, the bombshell resignation, the appointment of a new board composed of former floor workers, the radical changes in company policy. Spencer had kept his word. He was working in distribution centers across the country, one at a time, wearing a uniform, punching a clock, sleeping in simple apartments. Social media had called it a marketing stunt. Wall Street had called it madness. But Nadia, in the quiet moments of early morning, called it something else: redemption. She hadn't tried to contact him. Neither had he contacted her. It was as if both had made a tacit agreement that they needed distance to understand what they really felt, whether it was love or just the echo of an old gesture reverberating through the years. Nadia had focused on the twins, on the routine that was finally stable, on nights when she could sleep without dreaming of courtrooms or losses. Ethan and Emma were growing, laughing more, asking less about Daddy. Life was reorganizing itself. But there was an empty space she couldn't fill, a space in the shape of a man who had lied, but had also been the most honest person she'd ever known.
It was Sarah who brought the news. "He's in Ohio now," she said, showing her phone with a photo taken by some employee. Spencer carrying boxes, uniform dirty with grease, face tired but with a smile that seemed genuine. "Says here he'll be there 3 more months before going to the next one." Nadia looked at the photo longer than she intended. His hands were calloused, his shoulders seemed heavier, but there was something different in his eyes, as if he'd finally found what he was looking for. "You should go," Sarah said, quietly. "Just to see, just to know." Nadia shook her head, but the seed had already been planted. And seeds, she knew, have the terrible habit of growing even when you don't want them to. The drive to Ohio took 6 hours. Nadia left the twins with Sarah, made up an excuse about visiting a distant cousin, and drove with her heart beating faster with each mile. She didn't know what she was going to say, didn't know if she'd scream or cry or simply turn her back again. But she needed to see, needed to know if the man who had shattered her world had really changed, or if it was just another well-executed performance. The distribution center in Ohio was smaller than Harrisburg's, but the atmosphere was the same: cold lights, endless shelves, the smell of cardboard and machine oil. Nadia entered through the visitor's gate, showed identification, and asked for Spencer Walsh.
She found him in the loading yard, helping unload a truck. His uniform was drenched in sweat, hands dirty, and when he lifted a heavy box, Nadia saw the muscles in his arms strain in a way that only comes from real, repeated, honest work. He didn't see her at first. He was focused, talking with another operator, laughing at something the man had said. And then he turned his head, and his eyes met hers. The world stopped. Spencer dropped the box with a dull thud, lips parting in pure shock. And Nadia, standing there a few yards away, felt all the rehearsed words evaporate. All that remained was the raw truth. She had missed him. Spencer walked toward her slowly, as if afraid that a sudden movement would make her disappear. "Nadia," he said, and the name came out like a prayer. She didn't respond immediately, just looked, really looked, at the calloused hands, at the sunburned face, at the eyes that carried new scars, but also a peace she hadn't seen before. "You really changed," she finally said, voice almost a whisper. Spencer nodded slowly. "You taught me how," he responded. "You and Lucas. You showed me that gestures matter, that people matter, that I'd built an empire but had forgotten why." He took another step, stopping a breath away. "And I'm sorry. For lying, for meddling in your life without permission, for making you feel like you had no control."
Nadia felt tears coming, but this time she didn't hold them back. "I hated you," she said, voice trembling. "Hated you for making me believe I did it alone. But I also thank you, because you gave me a chance when no one else did. And I don't know how to deal with both those things at the same time." Spencer raised his hand, hesitant, and when Nadia didn't pull back, he touched her face with his fingertips, a light touch, reverent, as if she were made of glass. "You did it alone," he said firmly. "I just adjusted the system so it would stop working against you. The strength was always yours, always." And then he said the words she didn't know she needed to hear. "And I love you, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because you taught me to be human again." Nadia didn't plan what happened next, didn't think, didn't hesitate. She just pulled Spencer by the front of his dirty uniform and kissed him, a kiss that held 6 months of distance, 12 years of gratitude, and a lifetime of fear, finally dissolving. He wrapped his arms around her, and she smelled sweat and grease and honesty, and it was perfect. It was real. When they separated, breathless, Spencer pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "Are Ethan and Emma okay?" Nadia laughed, a real laugh full of hope. "They are, and they're going to want to meet you, the real man, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just you." Spencer smiled, and in that smile, Nadia saw the future taking shape. Not a perfect future, but a possible one, built on gestures, on presence, on daily choices to show up and matter. And as the sun set over the Ohio warehouse between boxes and forklifts, two hearts that had been broken by different destinies began to learn, together, how to beat in the same rhythm again.
Just as Nadia discovered that love can be reborn even after the deepest pain, and Spencer learned that true wealth lies in who we are when no one is watching, each of us also carries this power of transformation within ourselves. Their story reminds us that the gestures we make today, however small they may seem, can echo through entire generations, changing lives in ways we could never imagine. And that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't never falling, but getting up again, opening your heart again, believing again. Stories like this show us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose to be better, and never too late to believe that love, true love, the kind built on actions, on presence, on daily choices, is still the most powerful force in the world. Nadia and Spencer teach us that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failing, and that allowing yourself to be seen with all your wounds and imperfections is what makes us truly human. If this story touched you, if it made your heart tighten or your eyes fill with tears, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Leave this message as a reminder to yourself and to everyone who passes through here that it's always worth believing, always worth fighting, and always worth loving.
Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience, with each episode, emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, every story is an invitation to feel more, live more, and believe that love, in all its forms, still moves the world. And this was just one of the many stories that will still move you here, because as long as there are hearts beating, there will be stories to tell. And we'll be here every week reminding you that it's worth feeling.